In this lesson, I want to show you how we can use jQuery to do AJAX calls. And I'm going to be using some web resources. So one of the resources that I'm going to be using is going to be CodePen. And CodePen is a really neat resource because it gives you the ability to type some HTML, CSS, or JavaScript and have it displayed here within the display area. So we see that as soon as we type it in, it gets displayed and so on. So we can create an ID here and give this an ID of, maybe we could call it button, because we're probably going to need some kind of button to initiate this AJAX call. So we'll just create a button there. And we can also assign some CSS here, so btn, and we'll do a border, so one pic solid, black border around it, and we'll add some padding around it, so make it look a little bit more like a button. And I did have a mistake there, so now and also display block. So now we need to hook up our JavaScript and maybe even give it a width. So maybe I do a width of 200 pics. So it's not too big. And now let's add in jQuery into our library here, so we have access to jQuery, and CodePen makes it really easy because we can do a quick add or we can just link to the library. So either way, that allows us to bring jQuery into our application that we're building out here. So with AJAX, we have the ability to load external content from external files. And I've set up a few resources here. So there's one, it's called json-generator.com. It allows you to generate some JSON data. And this is the data that we're going to utilize within our application and pull some of this data through. So we do need to have a file, external file that we can load and use within our web page. So over here, we've got myjson.com, and you can create and store JSON bins online, and they give you a nice little URL here where you can link to it and utilize the JSON data. So if I copy and paste this, so I can copy this data, place it in here. I've added some customized JSON data, and essentially it's just being output over here. So now we've got an online file that we can pull through and use within our JavaScript. So let's try this out. So now whenever we click the button, we want to initiate the loading of the data, and we want to output it within an output area. So I'm going to actually need another div here, and I'm going to give it an ID of output so that we have something that we can select within our jQuery and output some of that content. So we've set up an output area, set up a button, and now let's set up the actual click event. So $, and select the ID there, so btn, and the function is click. So listening for that click event to happen. And so whenever that gets initiated, then we're going to update some of that content within output. So again, we're going to select output here and just make sure that everything is working properly before we proceed, and we'll just put hello world. So now when I save it, and if I click this, we see that we get the output. So nicely working there. So now let's take this one step further and actually load some of that content into that output area. And the way that we can do this is we can load content into that area. So we can specify that we're output, and instead of setting that HTML and so on, we can load a file into there. So let's try loading, and typically you wouldn't load a JSON file, but for this instance we're going to just load in the contents of that JSON file. So we're going to load the file location into the URL, so whenever it gets clicked we load through all of that JSON data. So of course it's not really as readable, but JSON is more readable than XML would have been. So we see that whenever I click this, we're loading in that content in there. So we also have an option to find out even more information as we're loading this into our document. So we also have the option so we can load it in, and we can also do a callback function. So whenever the content gets loaded, we can run a function that will maybe do something. So we'll do function, and this function can initiate, maybe we can have it initiate an alert that will say loaded. Or even better yet, let's update that inner HTML of the button and have it say loaded. Let's just save that and tidy it up so it's a lot more readable. So now when we load it in, we update the inner HTML of the button, it says loaded. So we got all of that information loaded in. So this just shows that we can load content really easily into our HTML page via load. And this type of functionality would be more best suited if you had some HTML content, or if you had some plain text that you want to simply load in. Or if you had an output coming from a server that was being rendered out and you want to load that into that content area. So that's probably the best uses for it. And if we want to actually access some of this data that we're returning back from the request, we need to format and use a different method that's available within JQuery. So I'm going to show you how to do that in the upcoming lesson.